15 years old when Pope John Paul II died. I was a Catholic kid attending a Catholic high school, having attended a Catholic grade school, and I was living in St. Louis, which has such a notable Catholic history and population that I recently learned it's called the Rome of the West. So the Pope dying was an enormous, enormous deal to me, to everyone I knew, and to basically anyone I had ever met. And yeah, obviously the Pope dying is a big deal throughout the world. I get that. But because I was 15, and because he'd been Pope my whole life and then some, and because I was in this sea of Catholicism, at the time, to me, it felt like the most significant thing to happen in the world in my lifetime. Or like the second most significant thing. A natural consequence of this significant world event is that it got me and an awful lot of people interested in the process of electing a new Pope. JP2 had the third longest papal reign ever, so it was the first time in a long time that the world got a glimpse at this ritual that is crucially important, charmingly archaic, and deeply secretive. When it happened again only 8 years later, that's when Robert Harris was inspired to write the novel Conclave that became this movie Conclave. As you would expect in a movie about electing a pope, the movie opens with a dead pope. The task of summoning cardinals to the Vatican and presiding over the election falls to Dean Cardinal Lawrence, played by our guy Ralph Fiennes. While any cardinal in the conclave can be elected pope, there are 4 candidates, we'll say. The 4 people that are gunning for the papacy and are likely to get votes. 2 of them we meet as soon as the pope dies. Cardinal Bellini, played by our guy the Tooch, and Cardinal Tremblay, played by our guy John Lithgow. A lot of our guys are here. You love to see it. Bellini and Tremblay represent the progressive delegation of cardinals who have a modern perspective on the world and the future of the church. Once the cardinals convene on the Vatican, we meet Cardinal Adeyemi, played by Lucian Mzamati, and Cardinal Tedesco, played by Sergio Castellitto. Cardinal Lawrence holds more of a progressive view of the church and whips votes for Bellini, but really the progressive caucus just wants someone to challenge Tedesco, who is a fiery traditionalist and wants to return the church to a more traditional state. Or as Bellini puts it, Tedesco will undo the 60 years of progress that the last few popes made in bringing the church into the modern world.
And let it go to him? I could never live with myself.
I'm betting most people have some sense of how a pope is elected, given it's happened twice in the last 20 years, but in case you're new to this, a group of 80 or 100 of the top cardinals in the church lock themselves in the Sistine Chapel, have extremely little communication with the outside world, and vote continuously until they collectively decide on a new pope. One thing Cardinal Lawrence oversees ahead of the conclave is the preparations to the Sistine Chapel to make it soundproof and more impenetrable to the outside world. They even sweep it for listening devices, which is something that was actually done before the 2013 conclave that elected Pope Francis. In the movie, it's a good visual to have them sweep a 500-year-old church looking for technology built in the last 10 years. After all, this is a movie about the ancient traditions of the church colliding with the modern world. At the first vote, the 4 expected candidates get the most votes, but none get the requisite 2/3 majority, as expected, but it's kind of a baseline pulse of the room kind of thing. Cardinal Lawrence is surprised to receive 5 votes himself, despite telling multiple people he didn't want to be pope, and another surprise is that 1 vote goes to Cardinal Benitez, played by Carlos Diaz. That's notable because a few hours earlier, none of the cardinals knew that Benitez existed. He had recently been made a cardinal by the late Pope in secret due to the sensitivity of his Catholic ministry in Kabul. In fact, Tremblay argues to Lawrence that maybe Benitez shouldn't be allowed in the conclave at all, given the mysterious circumstances of his qualifications, which are difficult to verify so soon before sequester. Lawrence ultimately allows Benitez to take part in the conclave, but this is not the only time the sequester makes Lawrence's job of presiding over the election more difficult. The night before they're cut off from the outside world, Lawrence learns of some claims that the Pope asked for the resignation of one of the cardinals just before his death. All Lawrence can really do is ask the cardinal directly about it, but he can't dig any further due to the sequester. His assistant Raymond does some digging on his behalf, but Lawrence is only allowed to speak to Raymond for a few minutes a day, so he's only privy to so much. And this lack of information is kind of the thrust of the second act, as scandals emerge for several of the leading candidates that Lawrence must investigate despite having limited means to do so. This is all why I was really excited for Conclave when it was announced. Yes, it's about an inherently intriguing and secretive election process. Yes, all of our favorite guys are here, but really it was this whole conceit about a political thriller mystery taking place in these claustrophobic, closed-off circumstances that drew me in. That's a great hook. In execution, I find Conclave to be incredibly refreshing. It's the kind of talky, complex movie for adults that I'm constantly complaining they don't make enough anymore, and it's also a movie that's pretty much exactly what it promises to be. It opens with the death of a sitting pope, and it ends with the titular conclave electing a new pope. And in between, there's gossip and scandals and intrigue and jockeying for power. It delivers pretty much exactly what it says in the box. And I only hedge slightly because I've heard more than one person say that they were expecting it to maybe be more of a thriller, and maybe including this moment in the trailer didn't help. It is pretty thriller-ish. You know, it's paced like an Agatha Christie novel with its claustrophobia and new complication being introduced every 10 or 15 minutes, but it stays pretty grounded and never becomes like a murder mystery, for example. Wikipedia calls it a political thriller, but it leans more politics than thrills. Robert Harris said of his book, "It's all politics in the end." Director Edward Berger described the movie as, quote, "a chess game of political intrigue." Maybe it's a happy coincidence, but it's at least notable that the novel came out in 2016 and the movie came out in 2024, two crucial presidential election years in the United States. The movie features progressive and traditionalist factions within the conclave. They talk about messaging and how to whip up votes. They dig up dirt on people. They sabotage other candidates. This movie could have been about a Senate race, and they wouldn't have had to change very much, because at its core, it's a movie about the political process. Which kind of implicitly also makes it a movie about gossip. When the Pope dies, Lawrence asks Tremblay why he wasn't called right away, and Tremblay says he wanted to ascertain all the facts.
I wanted to ascertain all the facts. You know how rumor spreads.
And then like 15 minutes later, we hear some unconfirmed rumors about Tremblay himself, and Lawrence spends the better half of the first and second act digging into it. Although Lawrence does support Bellini for the papacy, you never get the sense that he's digging into the other candidates to sabotage them. It's more because he genuinely cares about the church and wants to make sure that the person who's elected pope doesn't have any skeletons that could later come out and hurt the reputation of the papacy and the church. Everything Lawrence does reads to me as pragmatic and not at all malicious. Ralph Fiennes has such an expressive face that he doesn't need to open his mouth for you to know what he's thinking or feeling. Which is important because regardless of what he's thinking or feeling, he maintains a very calm demeanor despite inner turmoil. But the inner turmoil reads up here. Cardinal Lawrence is in the midst of a minor crisis of faith. He says he's having trouble praying. He had asked the late Pope if he could step down from being Dean Cardinal and be reassigned, but the Pope effectively refused his resignation. So as he's presiding over the election that will determine the future of the church, he's having his doubts about his place in that future. And it probably doesn't help his crisis of faith that all these scandals keep popping up. Men who are receiving significant votes to be Pope, to be God's vessel, to be the conduit for God's will on earth, are demonstrating to Lawrence that they're not worthy of that responsibility. The movie doesn't necessarily get into this explicitly, but after all those years of Catholic school, I can't help but think about the inherent contradictions of the papacy, where the Pope is supposed to be infallible on certain matters, literally speaking for God, but he's also just a man. Put a pin in that for 1 second. There's an important early scene that sets up the stakes of the conclave where the liberal bloc of cardinals have a little sit down and discuss how to best beat Tedesco. They intend to whip up votes for Bellini, and when he talks about messaging in his pitch to get votes, he says,
Tell them that I believe women should play more of a role in the curia.
Let's not mention women.
Why?
The movie goes out of its way to show the dozens of nuns working behind the scenes to help facilitate the conclave. Chief among them, Isabella Rossellini, who is Oscar nominated for the first time in her 48-year movie career. We see the nuns cooking all the food, serving the meals, preparing the dormitories, etc. But notably, we barely hear any of them speak. Given the collective gasps from the men in the room when Bellini suggests women play a bigger role in the church, it's certainly not an accident that the movie is drawing our attention to the silent but crucial role of the nuns. And once you start looking for things like this in the movie, you'll notice that it is actually the nuns that break open the scandals that end the papal campaigns of two of the cardinals. Cardinal Lawrence may be working hard to find out what the truth is about these men and what they may or may not have done, but the nuns already know what the truth is. And it's only because of the nuns that the truth is ultimately exposed. At the end of the day, it really is the women who are protecting the sanctity of the papacy and protecting the reputation of the church. Catholic outlets reviewing this movie have been a little more mixed than lay people. Some took issue with the plot turn. Some went so far as to call the movie a mockery of the Catholic faith. I didn't find it to be that exactly. To repeat myself, the scandals mostly just show the cardinals to be fallible men. It does get kind of sticky though when you consider the possibility of one of these fallible men becoming a semi-infallible pope. At first I kind of read cynicism here, that the movie was critical of the whole idea of these flawed, ambitious men gunning to be crowned the most holy and most powerful Catholic in the world. But on second viewing, I kind of took the entirely opposite view. The whole point of the movie is that these fallible men are prevented from becoming the pope because of the work of the faithful, because of Cardinal Lawrence, because of the nuns, and kind of because of the machinations of the Pope before his death. One might even be inclined to read divine intervention taking place in this conclave. Again, the movie ends with the election of a new Pope, and given the themes and ideas swirling around here, and giving a few visual indicators that I won't spoil, I think the movie is arguing that the person who's ultimately elected is absolutely the right man for the job. And I find the movie's argument convincing. Cardinal Lawrence begins the movie amid a crisis of faith, but all the same, he soldiers on to preside over the conclave. Despite his inner turmoil, he has faith in this ancient election process. He has faith in the late Pope who refused his resignation and insisted he stay on to run the conclave. And in the end, I would argue, his faith is rewarded.